Five.
Hello, welcome to Instructional Design from the Ground Up. We've got a great evening for you tonight. We have our regulars, and look at them, Ashley and Miko. And of course, Denise is here. She's going to be pushing the buttons and making us all look terrific. And we're talking about online learning tonight. And I know this is of value to a whole bunch of you, especially me, because I can't wait to hear what Ashley's going to talk about. What we're going to do is go through a session. Ashley's going to have some slides and talk about some things, and we're going to have a conversation together. We invite all of you to jump in and chat and offer your comments. We've got some great comments this last week. So keep them coming, keep chatting with us, keep telling us what you would like to see on here. And this is your channel. If you're an instructional designer, a subject matter expert, a teacher, a trainer, or anybody else is involved in education or training. So, with that, Miss Ashley, what do you have for us this evening?
Thank you so much, Chuck. So, today we're going to be discussing online learning and specifically how to make it better. So, I've got some practical information that kind of explains the basic background of online learning or e learning, as it's traditionally been called. And then I want to talk about the various principles of traditional instructional design and how you can actually apply them to an online or an e-learning course. And then we'll go into, some of the things that we've seen that are working and what isn't working in the online arena as it relates to learning and development. So with that, can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So, when you think about e learning, typically it falls into two categories. The first is synchronous. So, that's where you have an online course that people attend at the same time. You'll see that in traditionally webinars, or if you have a Blackboard course where people are entering a room at the same time, that's what a synchronous course would typically look like. And then for asynchronous, you're looking at standalone courses or modules that participants take by themselves. So anything that's typically designed in Captivate or Camtasia or even Storyline will fall under an asynchronous course category. And one of the hallmarks of an asynchronous course is because you're just interacting with the computer or the website, you will have an interactive element where you're not just watching something, but you can click on things and interact with various parts of the actual course, as opposed to interacting with classmates like you would for a synchronous course. Can you go to the next slide? So, when we think about online learning, a lot of times people try to create things that are out of the box or flashy, but there are a lot of ways that you can apply traditional principles of instructional systems design to your e learning course design, which will allow you to still captivate your audience and create a space where learning is occurring in a much more structured and sound way. So now we're going to talk about traditional principles of instructional design, specifically Gagne's 9 principles of learning and Bloom's taxonomy, and how they can appropriately be applied to e-learning curriculum. Can you go to the next slide? So we all know about Gagne's 9 events, right? The first thing you want to do is gain the attention of your audience. And what I appreciate doing with e learning courses, especially if it's asynchronous, is basing it around a scenario and looking specifically at a worst case scenario. So if you take your objectives of this is the behavior or the degree or the condition that you want to see from your learners, and you flip it. So, a good example, I did a course that was about an active shooter. And so, the worst case scenario, obviously, is someone attacking you in your office space. And so, we created a simulation where the audience is watching someone attack in an office space. And so it was a simulated environment. And then we applied relevant recent stories of those things happening. And right there, you've got someone's attention, right? They're feeling it in their chest that someone is could potentially attack them, so they need to pay attention to what's being presented in the course. And then from there, you go into your objectives. And I believe in following the what's in it for me method, or WIFM as it's called. And instead of traditionally using the types of phrase, upon completion of this course, the learner shall be able to do X, because you're in an online space, you want to make it more engaging. And one way that you can do that is by explaining clearly with active voice what is important for me as a learner, especially if the course is 20 or 30 minutes long and has 10 to 15 modules that I have to sit and click through. I want to know, is this going to make me smarter, better, faster, stronger, right? So, so being able to explain clearly and in active voice, which is much better for online learning comprehension, in my opinion. When you can use that kind of language, you're really grabbing your learners and making it clear that this course that you're going to sit through is going to be valuable for you and your time because of X. And then after that, you want to use recall, where you're explicitly applying what the learner already knows to the content that you're going to be presenting. And that's why you see a lot of successful e learning courses that are scenario based. One of the biggest gaps that people fall into, or a trap, I would say, of e learning, is they tend to create courses that are all about memorization and not application or understanding or comprehension, excuse me. And so the problem that we have is, if you're doing death by PowerPoint in an online learning space, your retention of your learners is going to drop dramatically. And as instructional designers, that's something we have to be cognizant of, not only through the design, but the implementation and the evaluation. So when you think about recall, you want to use scenarios that ground the realism of the content. So thinking through, what your learners' experiences are prior to taking the course is really valuable. So that's where the audience analysis comes in. And so as you're going through and applying the ADDIE model to your course design, you want to really get a sense of your audience's skill level. If it's something related to technology, thinking through, what are some general examples that will apply directly to my audience in terms of how they use this technology or a similar technology. And so having that recall will be really valuable as you're creating the interactivity, as you're creating the knowledge checks, as you're creating the various content that you're presenting. So those are some things that you can think through. And then, in my opinion, steps 4 through 9, or the events 4 through 9, presenting content, providing learner guidance, eliciting performance, providing feedback, and assessing performance, and enhancing retention and transfer. Those are things that all really come together in the bulk of your content and your interactivity. So, as you're presenting the content, which is the fourth event, you want to wrap up events 5 through 9 in that. So, for example, if we were to do, let's say, a demo of of how to complete a task. So, for example, when I was working for U.S. Customs and Border Protection, I had to create a lot of scenario based exercises where not only did I have to have a tell, show, and try scenario, right? But then I had to create some sort of way where I'm eliciting feedback and guiding the learner. So, specifically, when you're using e learning, you want to think through what kind of feedback do I want my learner to experience in this space? Do you want it to be graded? Do you want it to be ungraded? If someone clicks on the wrong part of a screen, is that something that you want to have feedback appear for? So those are the kinds of things that you're thinking through when you're providing learning guidance and eliciting performance. And you can do all of those things simultaneously with just a couple of slides in Captivate or in Storyline, which I think is really helpful. And then, depending on the type of interactivity you're using, if you want to assess the performance of your learner, that's also something you can think through with a scenario. So, the thing that I do when I'm coaching a new instructional designer and they're writing knowledge checks, that's typically an ungraded way where we can assess someone's performance. The usual response is to create a multiple choice memorization question. And I always instruct my instructional designers to steer clear from that type of questioning. And I challenge them to say, create a scenario based knowledge check question that relates to a response. So, based on the content that we're presenting, how would someone respond to X? And so, from that standpoint, you're going to get a better chance to increase your learners' retention. And so the final event, which is enhanced retention and transfer, like I said, it really can be much more impactful depending on how you are not only scaffolding your learning content, but also how you're testing your learners. And one thing that's important to keep in mind is the Ebbinghaus curve. So if you're creating a piece of e-learning content, two things that are important to remember is that someone's attention span can only be held but for so long. So typically we try to encourage modules no more than 20 minutes in length. If you can grab someone's attention and teach them something and have them apply it or practice it in an e-learning space in less than 20 minutes, the chances of the Ebbinghaus curve, which is the amount of time it takes for someone to forget a piece of knowledge, it really affects that in a positive way. But then the other thing you have to think through as you're designing your course, especially if it's an e-learning course, how timely is the content that you're presenting? Is it something that's going to need to be updated in a couple of months? Is there a government regulation that is going to change everything in 6 months or with the next administration? So being cognizant of those kinds of things also will affect how you present your information to enhance the retention and the knowledge transfer. The other thing that's important to consider as you're going through this, looking at enhancing retention and knowledge transfer, is what other courses need to be presented or resources need to be provided to support this course. A lot of times people think with e-learning, I'll just publish this course and it will clarify everything. But the reality is, a lot of times you need to consider what types of job aids can be developed and what types of resources do I also need to incorporate into this course or provide to ensure that my learners are understanding everything that's being presented. Don't just pack everything into a course with the assumption that that will be successful. Next slide. How are we doing on time, Denise?
You have time. We have plenty of time. Keep going.
Awesome.
It's awesome content.
Thank you. So the next thing that's just as valuable is understanding Bloom's taxonomy. The instructional designers that I mentor typically hate me for this, but Bloom's taxonomy is just as important with e-learning content as it is with instructor-led training or synchronous content that you're presenting. Because typically Bloom's taxonomy is It's usually presented as a triangle, but basically the six categories that we have presented here align with various sets of verbs that you can use to create the objectives for your course. And a lot of times, instructional designers that are new to the industry will put everything under the category of understand. So, in the objectives that they're writing, it'll be as simple upon completion of this module, the learner should be able to understand how to create a new campaign. But you have to understand, you have to recognize that the medium that you're using is important to distinguish how you're going to teach your learners something. And understand in the Bloom's taxonomy creates a lot of different verbs that you can apply to your learning objectives, which are valuable. But the point of these verbs is to really help you as the instructional designer know how you're going to test the knowledge and understanding of your learner. So with e-learning, typically you want to use the apply verbs, evaluate, and if you have the space for it, like if you have the capability to do it, you can use create. Using the verbs within those first four are really more effective with the e-learning space. And I say that because with application, typically with e-learning or e-learning course development software, you have the ability for someone to actually build something within the software. So for example, if I was doing a simulation or a demo module, I would use the verbs in apply. So, upon completion of this module, my learner should be able to successfully, within 3 attempts, apply this filter to a setting, right? But a lot of times learners or instructional designers will say, the learner should be able to explain this or understand that. And it's a one-way communicative device, right? So thinking about your e-learning presentation, like I said, the medium that you're using is really important. And it will help you to dissect how you want to see your learners succeed. And I always trip up instructional designers when they give me their design document and it says the learner should be able to explain the definitions of these key terms. And I ask them, where will they do that? This course is being developed in Storyline. Are they going to do a matching exercise? Are they going to write in the characteristics of one of these phrases? How are you going to demonstrate that learning has occurred? And then at that point, they usually roll their eyes and put me on mute. But ultimately, the point is you're thinking very critically about how you want to see your learners demonstrate back to you, the designer, that they are learning. And that's the value of Bloom's taxonomy. I don't have it up, but typically I have printed out my own picture of Bloom's taxonomy that I use when I'm developing courses and curriculum. So I highly recommend it. It's a traditional tool that a lot of e-learning developers have moved away from, but when used effectively, it allows you to truly understand the nuances of your course. And this will come into play and be really beneficial when you're looking at how you want to evaluate the effectiveness of your course, which, if you're going for more money from your organization and you need to really justify the effectiveness of your curriculum, that's where these kinds of things come into play. Next slide. So what's working and what isn't? So when we look at e-learning, today, there are a lot of spaces in this market. I myself have had the honor of helping to stand up corporate universities for government organizations and franchises. And it's really interesting when you think about it. But I would say what is working is, and this is not a shout out or a plug, but if anyone is interested in looking at a really successful e-learning corporate university, I would check out Salesforce. They have a lot of interesting elements. Miko, you'd be interested in this. They do gamification in a lot of their profiles and how they scaffold their curriculum. And they have incentivized it, and they have various point structures that are so well thought out that it was, as an instructional designer, I was obsessed. And the great thing about Salesforce is you can sign up for free. So if you wanted to take a look at the LMS that they've provided for their customers, you can get a sense of what they're doing, how they're organizing their learning profiles and the curriculum and the different resources that they provide. Personally, I would say what isn't working is Cornerstone. So this gets kind of meta, but basically the LMS for the LMS provider Cornerstone is very, very complex. And when you go to it, there are just so many places that you can look that it really becomes overwhelming. The content is decent, but in terms of how it's structured and organized, you have to know and be an expert in the type of Cornerstone program that you have agreed to in order to actually know what you want to look for on their site. So that's something in terms of the corporate university space that I thought was really interesting. And the other thing that I think is really cool now is adult education for profit e-learning is blowing up. And I come from a very traditional instructional design background. I'm a bit of a purist in that standpoint, that like I want my designers to have adult education experience. But now anyone who has Premiere Pro or Camtasia has the ability to create a course. I don't know if anyone has heard of Masterclass, but literally it's just celebrities and people who are at the top of their industry sitting in front of a camera talking about themselves. And it's making so much money. And I heard that it's really, really successful. So I'm curious to see, and I would love to do more research on if there's an instructional designer mastermind that's like organizing all of these things, because that's something that I'm really, really interested in. Now, Udemy, if you haven't heard of it, please check it out. It's a really interesting website that basically allows anyone to be an instructional designer and a subject matter expert. I had a friend who wanted to create a course for understanding various legal policies and procedures for the everyday man or woman. And he came to me, and I was, coming at it from a very prescript instructional design process. And he was like, well, I can just go to this website and put a video of me here and questions here and have a chunk here for people to put in their answers, and that should be fine, right? I almost cringed. I allowed him the space to say that. But ultimately, what's really fascinating about Udemy is that you, as a subject matter expert, have the ability to build your own courses. And you also have your own LMS in your account. So it's really, really fascinating when you think about it. I personally am still of the mind that, like, if you want to go the Udemy route because it is technically more cost effective, I still recommend following up with an instructional designer just to make sure that your curriculum is sound. And then finally, everybody knows about YouTube University, right? It is the gold standard of putting stuff on the internet and letting people learn unregulated. So my pros and cons with it are that, it's great because I've heard stories of people who've actually started second careers just by watching YouTube videos of learning how to fix things. And now they do that full time. However, I think, like I said, because it's unregulated in certain standards, you might be getting inaccurate information or you're not learning how to effectively do something based on best practices. So, taking your YouTube university courses with a grain of salt is always my recommendation, but I really do appreciate how much there is out there. And we're on YouTube. So there's that. So, thinking through those kinds of things really have helped me to understand like what is and what isn't working within the for-profit space for adult education. And then finally, there is the government, which in some ways it's not standard. Well, I'll just say this, it's not standardized. So you'll have some government agencies who are literally working off of, the old black and green screens from the Jurassic Park. Everybody remembers that scene in Jurassic Park where she's like clicking through and you can see how old everything looks on the computers. Oh my God. There are some government agencies that are still working off of that stuff. I kid you not, and presenting curriculum in that way. But then there are other government platforms and learning management systems that are truly cutting edge, state of the art. I had the honor of managing a contract where we were actually executing cyber warfare games for government agencies of all levels. And it was cutting edge experiential learning. And I know that if you have the opportunity to work for the Department of Defense or specifically the armed forces, that is where you'll go to get some truly top notch, cutting edge adult learning technology experience. And I'm going to say it again, it's not all standardized. However, I do know that the Army was one of the first organizations to execute with virtual reality training. Whenever they were recruiting new people into the service, that was one thing that they used. So thinking through those kinds of things, it's really fascinating to see what is and isn't working within online learning, specifically with the government space. Next slide. Oh, okay, good. There is another slide. So finally,
Your last slide.
the final slide. So finally, what's next in online learning? I've done some really interesting research, and what I thought was fascinating is that now the big thing that people in this space are looking to address is Zoom fatigue. So when you think about asynchronous learning experiences, you want to be considering how can you make this space less of a hassle or less of something that like people want to just not put their cameras on for. And so I've seen some really interesting opportunities for this. Specifically, Facebook is coming up with an application that allows people to enter into a space. And then there are things like virtual chat rooms where you can actually wander around a space and hear people talking as you get closer. And when you walk away, it gets fainter. So those are things that people now, e-learning developers, are trying to think through to battle asynchronous Zoom fatigue. Another popular thing that is starting to come up is online avatars. So if you're in an asynchronous space, I think we all remember the viral video of the lawyer in court who accidentally turned himself into a cat. So, so now some professors or online presenters are creating engaging avatars. I saw one that was a raccoon. And so, you have these things that will allow people to catch their attention. But I think, and I want to make this connection. I wouldn't be surprised if people are focusing on those things because they're not effectively applying Gagne's 9 principles of learning. So, in my opinion, if you're applying those traditional principles actively and successfully, you might not be as concerned about Zoom fatigue or having to turn yourself into a cat for your students to pay attention to you. We mentioned virtual reality, which I know for myself, I get dizzy very quickly, so I might not be good for it, but that's something that people are doing. And then incentivizing learning and engagement, which is something that Miko has talked about in previous videos that we've shown. That's something that I think is valuable, but I'm curious to see what happens next with that. So thank you so much for this time. I might have gone over by a lot, but I appreciate everyone's attention and allowing me this space to share this knowledge.
It was amazing, Ashley. That was an amazing presentation. I took a whole note. I just kept taking tons and tons of notes. I loved everything you said. I consider myself a newbie in this industry, and I soaked up a lot of what you talked about. Highlights for me, one of the things that really, well, actually had me laughing, chuckling a little bit, was when Chuck was shaking his head feverishly, like when you were talking about Bloom's taxonomy and the word understand. I could just see his head going like this. I've learned from Chuck never to use that word.
Never. If you're an
Never,
instructional
never.
designer and you say a student should be able to understand, I will find you. Um, and remember, to understand is a category within Bloom. And there's 3 different generations of Bloom, by the way. And one thing that I'll add to that, kind of a modernization of Bloom, is something I put in my last 2 books, which is the Content Mastery Continuum, which helps you use Bloom, which allows you to stack up degree of difficulty for learners. So whether they're a novice or an expert, then you can then go to Bloom and find a verb that'll work for you, which I think it's great. And the other thing, when you're talking about Gagne, on elements 5, 6, and 7, I changed those to, remember what I changed them to?
No.
Application feedback 1, 2, and 3.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was looking at a digital learning world, and I actually asked Dr. Gagne if he cared if I did that, and he did not care, honestly. So Dr. Gagne was fine with me moving that around a little bit. God love him. And so, I think when you look at these, and Miko, you got to jump in here. You 2 are the experts at this. I'm just talking. But I think the notion here is that this whole idea of just trying to transfer what you do in a classroom onto a screen of some sort, those days are gone. And the room to Zoom and the mentality of I can do the same thing here that I do there, that's going to go to the sidelines so quickly that it's just going to be a memory, because it's a whole different design space. It's a whole different way to learn. And now you've got an entire generation of learners. Anybody participated in the last 2 years in any level of education now has a new paradigm. And some of them will love it, some of them will hate it. But it's now the expected norm in terms of what you can do and what you can't do. So why do I have to sit in class? Why do I have to go to a brick and mortar establishment? All these different kind of questions, and you're seeing it fight out in school board meetings and all kinds of places, and students are sitting back and saying, I did okay for a year not going to class. Why do I now have to go to class? And that mentality will stay with them their entire lifetime, and they will have to look at that. And designers, if you're not already caught up with what the changes are, you need to really get going, because you are now at least 1 generation behind in where learners are. And the other things you have to think about, you're talking about YouTube. Of course, we're on YouTube and we're not monetized. We're not believe me, we're not making anybody on this channel unless Denise is making it and keeping it from
Costing
me.
us money, but that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a hole so far now. I got to sell another car, but you know, the notion here is, and I didn't understand a lot of this stuff, but I just saw the quarterly earnings for YouTube. They were released today, along with Alphabet and a lot of the other organizations. So they're now over 5 billion subscribers on YouTube worldwide. And every day there are 7 million new videos on YouTube, of which we are one. So we're competing with 6,999,999 other videos today that will appear on YouTube. So Miko, what do you think of that? You think we could take out that other 6,900,000?
Well, that's why people are willing to do that unspeakable, and that's why you see the most random things, because you have to compete with a lot. And I think that's what I use for online learning, because there's so much out there that you're competing with, even though students know they have to study and take the test and all of that. Attention, you are fighting over that attention with other things. And that's why I always say, faculty members, trainers, instructors, sometimes you have to take a risk. That's what I tell my team every single day that we have an interaction, because we are competing and the learners are wanting more. They have more access than ever to technology. It's really easy to get distracted. So you have to find ways to make learning so engaging and so powerful and, of course, effective in order to stay through time. So I believe the problem sometimes with online learning is that we want to replicate what happens in the classroom in an online platform. And that's a big mistake. It's a whole different kind of design. And the other thing is that students feel abandoned. They feel that it's a tier 2 category of learning, because in the classroom, they get to interact with the faculty members, they get to talk, they be in groups and all of that. And for some faculty members and instructors, online learning means read chapter 4 and take this quiz. And that's all you have to do for 15 weeks. And that's not online learning. So I cannot emphasize enough that that's not online learning. That's a supplemental activity to a learning experience, but that's not online learning. And that's why it fails so many times. So Ashley, great points. And even though somebody might tell you, well, that's basic, that's common knowledge, I can tell you for a fact that they're not putting practice. So if people want online learning to be effective, they have to start with good design. And that's the foundation, that's the backbone. After that, then you can evaluate all the technologies or the resources out there. So I was very impressed, because you were honestly taking us to basics, but that's the truth. That's exactly what we need to be able to build a strong foundation for online learning.
So I agree with Dr. Miko. I think actually that was tremendous. And you know, it's the basics like this that folks don't appreciate when you're sitting back there, and even people with PhDs in education never write an objective. And I know this for a fact. And many teachers getting their degrees never write objectives. They never write design plans. They're very knowledgeable about things that the program may think is important, but when it comes down to actually putting together courses and thinking about how learning takes place and facilitating learning transfer, that kind of stuff gets lost in the weeds. And a presentation like yours, actually, I wish everybody that teaches or trains or is a subject matter expert will watch the 30 minutes previous and get an understanding and appreciation of what we're talking about here. We're talking about a complete paradigm shift in the way design takes place. We're talking about a complete paradigm shift in the way people learn. We're talking about a complete paradigm shift in what people have in terms of expectation for the learning environment in that space. And until people accept that, until people appreciate that, until we all start working towards changing everything that happened in the generations of learning previous to this, I think we're now entering the 9th generation of learning. And in terms of it just now changes. Everything is changing. You never will go back to what we had 5 years ago. It will never happen. And those will be considered legacy classical programs if you sit in a classroom. And we have to think about creating community. We have to create the social space online and replicate in some way the interaction that people have in a classroom. You can create community. You can create conversation. You can create the kind of interactions that are appropriate for that learning space. But it takes a professional designer in most cases to do that. And what we see in many cases, look on YouTube, look on Udemy, look all these different places, and there are millions of people adding every day. And the percentage of those that have any thought about instructional design or how to do this correctly, it's, less than 1%. Anybody can make a YouTube video. Not everybody can teach or design. And we have to be okay with that. We have to be able to say to people out there that it takes trained professionals to design effective communication tools that then turn into learning. And I don't know. I watched the first 30 minutes, listen to Miko, listen to Denise. I know we're preaching to the choir in some ways, but we have a whole generation of new learners and a whole generation of legacy designs that we need to approach. And Miko, talk about your work, because I mean, that's what you do every day.
Well, absolutely. One thing that I appreciated about the list that Ashley had, and I think it's something that we have to be looking forward to and paying attention to, it's esports. Esports, it's a trend. They're great not only because they engage, because they can be fun, but also because you develop community that allows you to build community in an online space. Many online learners complain that they feel isolated. They don't have any sense of community. Esports can be a solution for that. And furthermore, for the psychomotor domain, sometimes you might wonder what assessment, what activity I might have for the psychomotor domain in an online environment. And definitely esports can be the solution for that. So adding to the list, something to pay attention to, esports.
That's perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that I really enjoyed, Ashley, that you mentioned that is super helpful to remember is when talking about looking at the verbs that you use for Bloom's taxonomy and creating the objectives, matching that, making sure that you're using the right verbs that can match that to the evaluation. And when you're thinking in those terms with that lens, wow, it just really put it into focus. Put it into focus for me. I mean, I learned it. I've learned from Chuck on this. I've learned from many instructors. I've read about it. But for some reason, it was a light bulb moment that just went off when I was listening to you. It just reinforced how important it is to be able to, when you are creating these objectives, to have that performance agreement and have that ability to be able to evaluate to that objective.
Absolutely. Like when you can draw it may not be a perfectly straight line, but when you can draw a line from the audience member or the learner to the objective to how you're measuring it in as many of the 4 levels or 5 levels of evaluation, that's when you have as close to a seamless course design as possible. And it's really through the taxonomy or the verbs that you're applying, which can help to underscore or clarify not only how you're going to test them, right? Like, do we want someone to have 100% passing, 75%? Why only 75? Like, it creates a space for all of these questions, but also it helps you to clarify when you're developing in the online space how you're going to use your tools effectively. A lot of times people will create stuff with Captivate or Storyline, and they'll just do the widgets, right? Accordion style, matching, pick this, and they're losing out on so many opportunities to use creatively a lot of the verbs that will help them get to a greater sense of learning, because they've created a restriction for themselves that doesn't actually exist.
Yep.
I wanted to add also, based on your list, that many people say, oh, but it's too expensive. PowerPoint works like wonder. Like, there are many things that you can do on PowerPoint. Gamification, little games, automatic feedback. If you really know how to master PowerPoint, So money should never be an issue stopping anyone from good design and good online experiences. I wanted to add that because it always comes to, oh, but we don't have the resources. And that's
That's a
true,
great
but
point.
you can come a long way with a PowerPoint.
Oh, I love that point, Miko. I really do, because I do think that it comes down to funding, money, wondering about the resources. I mean, I just put together a course myself, and I toyed around with what platform do I use for this? And so it came down to a consideration of money. But because of that doesn't mean that it didn't have to be, it wasn't good course design. Everything that I've learned, I applied, the ADDIE model method, all of that was put into this course, but it was put into a platform that I could reasonably afford and be able to put that out there and share it with learners. And so it should never be, I agree with you, it should never be an obstacle, because there are ways around it if you're designing with the right parameters and the right models in mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah, e-learning heroes. I don't know if you guys have subscribed, and for those watching, if you haven't, e-learning heroes. It's a big community, and what I like about them is that they have a bunch of free resources, templates, avatars, assets that you can incorporate into your online courses, online experiences. And they welcome, if you have created something, you can put it back there to give something to the open community. So I always send people there. They have really cool stuff for PowerPoint, for instance. If you want to create something in PowerPoint and you don't know how to design, put a background, characters, and all of that, you can find many solutions there. So e-learning heroes.
Oh, that's great.
That's tremendous. I got to tell you, I'm sitting here looking at the screen. I'm seeing you three, and I'm like a proud papa because you've all been my students. You've all gone down and hit the ground and done the most incredible stuff. And to listen to you, I just sit back here with a smile on my face. Ashley, I mean, you just killed it tonight. Miko, you are a leader in the field. Denise, you put together your own courses and put them online and done such creative things with this channel and everything else. And I'm a proud papa tonight. And for those of you that are watching this, whether it's live or in post, I want you to think about the level of professionalism and knowledge that's out there to work with you, whether you're an instructional designer or looking to get programs together or whatever you're trying to do. There are professionals out there that can help you do this work, and you can learn this work. There are incredible programs that you can become involved in. You can watch our 70 videos if you got nothing else to do with your life. There's all kind of things out there, but I think the point that we continue to make is that instructional design is a science. All the things we do are based on science. These are things that we have learned that we can now replicate. Goes through the scientific method. It goes through proof and paste and all the things that sciences do. And we know how people learn. We know how people respond to certain things. We know about populations. We know about evaluation and doing it in a way that's really tangibly correct and that shows that mastery has taken place. And if you struggle with these things and you need some help, reach out to any of us. Watch these videos, take a course. Just do something to up your level of skill in instructional design. And you will find that even a small investment of your time will pay incredible dividends. And tonight once again, I could not be more proud of the three of you. And thanks for being part of this effort that we've put together. And I know Denise is going to put the ribbons on it tonight. I'm just chatting on, but I could not close this tonight without saying how proud I am of all three of you and everything that you've brought to the field. And the time that we shared in class, you took it and exponentially made it better. And I'm just so proud of all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. That kind
Thank you,
words.
Chuck.
Thank you so much for
Thank
that.
you.
You've been
Yeah,
instrumental
it's
in
an honor
all of our
coming from you.
careers. And I want to thank everyone for joining us here in this live session or in the replay if you're watching it in the replay. Let us know if there's some topics that you want us to tackle in future live sessions. Put it in a comment on YouTube. Touch base with us on LinkedIn. All four of us, I should say, are on LinkedIn. Connect with us. Tell us what you want to hear, what you want to learn about. We are open to that, and we want to be here as part of your community of learning and to build that learning community. And we can't do that without you. So please reach out, connect, and help us build that community. Thank you so much. Catch us next week. We're going to be live again next week, and we will see you then. Stay safe out there, everyone.
Goodbye.
Good night.
Bye.